How many of you guys know who Newton Minow was? Anybody? So Newton Minow was a very active FCC chairman during the 1960s, and in 1962 he made a very famous speech referred to as the vast wasteland speech. He was talking, of course, about television, which was seen as the toxic poison of the day that you needed to keep your children away from. And he made a number of really, really compelling points. So compelling that he reached a young documentary producer at WNET in New York City, Joan Gans Cooney, who decided that she needed to do something about the vast wasteland. Well, she created something very, very special just 6 years, actually 5.5 years after that vast wasteland speech, something called Sesame Street. You guys have all heard of it. It debuted in, it debuted in 1969. Within 6 months, this lovable cast of characters who went through some really interesting stuff in building their street. In fact, they were banned in Mississippi. Within 6 months, they were on the cover of Time magazine and Newsweek magazine, and the show was being watched by 95% of Harlem preschoolers in different studies that were conducted back then. And in the interest of March Madness, and because that speech was just about 50 years ago, I wanted to show you for the first time here in Salt Lake City, I assure you, the origins of Sesame Street, the show. So let's see if we can get this to work. Whoops. I don't know if it's going to work. I have to click on maybe. Where's our tech person? What am I not doing? Oh. Sorry. Maybe you should stay here.
I can if you want me to.
Yeah, just for a little while. It's worth the wait. There it is. This is our version of Muppet Madness in a smoke-filled room.
I like it. But we ought to say something about the show, telling it like it is. Maybe the nitty-gritty little kitty show.
I like that. Well, then how about the itty-bitty nitty-gritty little kitty show? Hey, these kids can't read or write, can they?
No.
Then how's about we call the show Hey Stupid?
You really think you're going to get this show on the air?
Introducing a new television series for children.
Tape is rolling. Quiet, please.
It's the original pitch film.
Look right in there, Bert.
In there?
See right in there? Yeah, look a little closer.
11, 12. C is for cookie, that's good enough for me.
Rubber ducky, you're the one.
Doing the pigeon.
Over and under and through.
I'm the king of 8, and I'm here to state that everything here has to total 8.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The ladybugs came to the ladybugs picnic.
Have a rotten day.
Yeah, wow. It was my kind of guy.
So that was then. Yeah, we can just advance to the next slide. And it's 43 years later, and the longest running educational television program in history is in its 43rd what we call experimental season, because we're just evolving all the time. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how that long story is relevant today. A little bit about the literacy and STEM challenges that the show was not able to address, and how the founders, who are still very active in the organization, it's kind of a family-run business in a certain way. Joan Gans Cooney and her partner Lloyd Morissette are still on the executive committee of Sesame Workshop, are looking at their legacy and pushing us every day to address some of the major challenges, some of the major educational challenges that roil our country. I'm going to go over some of the more recent trends in children's media consumption and talk about all these different topics that you've seen. So this is the yellowed paper because it wasn't digitized early enough, but it appears on our website that Mrs. Cooney wrote with a grant from Carnegie Foundation in 1966. It was a plan to create an educational television show called Sesame Street. She talked to all the top researchers, cognitive psychologists, developmentalists, practitioners of the day, and actually executed against the plan. If you want to see a really good business plan, it still holds up. It's really interesting. And the question that she asked, which is so fresh and so relevant today, is not whether kids were learning from television or the media of the time, it's how can they learn? What do they learn? In which context are they learning? Still very fresh and relevant. And she and lots of others fomented a movement, which is a little bit of a Sesame movement around the world. The workshop has co-productions or its productions in over 140 countries, reaching about 100 million kids and families every week. Really interesting stuff happening in the developing world and emerging nations, particularly in Asia and in South Africa and sub-Saharan Africa right now. Here's Joan doing a little bit of a focus group test in the late 1960s. Always at the center of it was any piece of media that appears on the show is tested. It has to go through a rigorous research-based test. It's always been part of the DNA. Here are some of the researchers and the others who were involved in developing the show. I mean, imagine a show that combined, Jerry Lester from Harvard with, writers like Frank Oz and, people who walked into our offices with a sock puppet on their arm and looking like they were from the Weather Underground, Jim Henson. Quite a group. Things have changed a little bit from that screen to this other screen. And enter the new Joan Gans Cooney Center sort of towards the end of that sequence. So we were established 4 years ago to take a look at slightly older kids, although we do delve into the 4-year-olds occasionally, to focus on those foundational literacy skills, listening, reading, speaking, writing, that are fundamental even today, but how they blend with the new literacy skills, whether they're STEM skills or digital literacy skills or 21st century skills. We keep in our DNA and in our hearts and minds every single day that we are looking at the most vulnerable kids, the kids who Eileen Rosenthal referred to as, 46% of kids are at risk of not entering kindergarten, up to par, really fully ready for school. Others, say it's a little bit less than that, but certainly we're in a situation now where so many kids are being underserved, and we need to figure out a level up. And we're looking very closely not just at what's happening in the home and in the community, but also bridging between that moat that seems to exist, that has continued to exist, between what kids are doing outside of school and what they're doing inside of school. These are the activities. We do a lot of convening, a lot of workshopping and networking and different kinds of research meetings and convenings. We're supporting a whole range of different research experiments, both field research, but also different kinds of action research, which I'll get into. Doing a lot of, any of you read any of our reports? Anybody? Oh, good, okay. So we're getting around and people are familiar with, we put out a lot of stuff. We put out about 12.5 reports just in the last 4 years on the research and the different kinds of environmental scans that are important in this area. And we're trying to change agendas. We're very, very involved with policymakers, industry folks, and the like. So this haunts me. And we've talked a lot about that, this line at this conference and lots of others. And we've spent, I did a back of the envelope analysis of spending on literacy in the last 25 years. And it's over $100 billion in the United States. Just if you look at Title I, Reading First, all the range of different interventions that we've put towards reading instruction. And we have narrowed the gap between ethnic groups. We have not narrowed the gap between income groups. We basically have a flat line, 4 points in 25 years. And that's not, if that wasn't bad enough, we are all very familiar with these stats. Obviously when you look at the PISA international comparisons or the TIMSS international comparisons on math and science, we're really in the middle of the pack. While other countries have been making great leaps forward, it's not like we haven't been making any progress, but we have been flatlined. We have been kind of, what's the word? Treading in place? Same thing in math. Math is even worse. And now all of you who are working in the technology space are aware that there's a whole set of new affordances connected to ICT skills and a whole set of new employer-led demands for work and for teaming, and we need to take a look at those skills as well. These are the skill circles that were set up by the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. So, okay, we've kind of leveled off in terms of achievement. There's a whole range of changes in demography, in societal values, and all these different things are kind of leading us to, are we looking at a big opportunity, or are we looking at big risks from digital media? We think that the public dialogue has been largely about the worries that parents and practitioners and policymakers have, and these are all legitimate worries. But our view, and obviously speaking at an educational technology conference, I don't need to preach too hard. Our view is that the learning potentials and unique affordances of digital media are ripe for the plucking. I wanted to show you why. It's not just that there's been such a remarkable change in the quality and in the platforms and in the ubiquity of digital media in their lives. It's because kids are wearing digital media. It's part of their costumes, it's part of their essence. It's not even a question of digital natives. It's a question of digital beings. And the demand for the change is coming right from here. And I want to show you a video that 11, 9 to 12-year-olds made for us as part of the National STEM Video Game Challenge last year. It'll take a second to roll. This is a competition that we launched at the White House to promote the use of video games to advance STEM skills, and these are the winners of last year's youth competition. Here you go. We just sent them flip cams and they made it for us. Stop. We ran through this about 6 or 7 times. Yay!
I am Jacob Andrew Cothran. I live in Reno, Nevada, and I am in 6th grade.
Hi, my name is Shereen and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Hi, my name is Mark Breton and I live in Garland, Texas.
I'm Jasper Huguenin from Mercer Island, Washington. I'm in the 7th grade.
My name is Danny, and I go to the Nightingale Bamford School in New York City.
My name is Mohammed Al-Hatirida. I'm a homeschooling 8th grader, and my favorite subjects are math and science.
My name is Kendall McGowan. I'm a 7th grader in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Hello, my name is Joshua, and I'm 10 years old.
I'm Bailey Sperling, a 6th grade on Saffron, New York.
My name is Jeffrey. I live in Wayland, Massachusetts. I'm a 5th grader.
My name is Tate Welty. I go to Orono Schools as a 5th grader.
My name is Reese Wilkinson. I'm 9 years old. I live in Manor, Texas.
When I was 3 years old, I played my first video game.
I'm a really big fan of simulation games.
Computer games, RPG, adventure, and action.
I like story games the same way I like reading. It's like the person who made the game has got this whole universe made up.
I got into game making when I was 10, and I decided, why was I playing the games? Why don't I make my own game?
The first really interesting program I wrote was a program to teach me my multiplication tables.
My goals for the game was to make it educational.
I wanted this game to be fun, but I also wanted to inform kids about the ocean while they're playing.
I created this game because I wanted as many kids as possible to learn how to program.
You just beat President Obama on his game.
If you eat all the plants too quickly, then you won't have any left.
I designed it so that the player would use their imagination and creativity to help clean up the world's environmental problems.
I had to start out
kind of simple. Drawing the sprites with stick figures and everything.
While I was making my game, I used comments from my teacher, classmates, and friends to make my game more fun.
Probably my favorite part of building this game was testing it. I built a game that I enjoyed playing.
It teaches a lesson about teamwork.
After that, I took the game and gave it to my cousins. This is my user testing. And then I took the feedback, made it better, and then gave it back to them and see what they said.
Then I had my dad play it to make sure it was challenging enough for adults.
This is a lot harder than I thought.
My dad really loves video games.
It gives kids power and can be very empowering for everyone to learn how to program. Hopefully in the near future, I will find the time to create an even more interesting story rather than just a simple adventure game.
I'm going to be even better, even cooler, and even funnier.
When I grow up, I want to be a computer programmer.
I might be a doctor when I grow up.
I want to be a professional video game tester or a professional video game designer.
You'll be seeing me making games in the future.
One sec. So two of the winners there were at the White House Science Fair 3 weeks ago, and one of them actually got, the kid who you would expect got a chance to brief the president on his game. It was just an amazing moment, So I show you that because the modern media landscape is really changing, and when kids as young as 9 can develop their own media and become, I don't know how many of you have seen the YouTube video that's been viewed by, I don't know, 4 or 5 million viewers of a 12-year-old game developer. You know, they can really make an impact on people's thinking. So, but let's get a nuanced view of the modern media landscape. These two reports, one of which was co-authored by Mike Robb, who's here today from Fred Rogers Center, kind of paint a picture of kids 0 to 18. The Generation M series of reports, how many of you are familiar with the Kaiser Foundation reports? So there's been a series of 3 reports over the last, since 1999, last 13 years on media consumption that Kaiser has pioneered. And then this one was a blending of both Kaiser, Nielsen, Sesame Workshop research on the younger kids. By the way, all these reports that I'm going to be showing you are free of charge, of course, downloadable on the variety of different sites that they are the authors. This report from just a few months ago from Common Sense Media was a follow-up on an earlier report by Kaiser on the 0 to 8s. And you get a sense of just what the normative media experience is these days, and it's, I don't know, alarming at on some levels, and then instructive on many other levels. So how many of you guys, what percentage of kids do you guys think who are under 3 have televisions in their own bedroom? More than 30? More than 40? Yeah, Mike, I can't remember. It's in the 40s. It's kind of unbelievable. But I think what we're looking at in these data is not only sort of the fact that there's a ubiquity argument, but also there are equity issues. There's certainly issues that relate to what Common Sense Media referred to as an apps gap between the higher income kids and the lower income kids, but also the fact that television is still king, and derivatives of television are still king for the kids under 8. This is a little bit on the digital divide that exists. And I think that the access issues are actually going to be solved, or the gaps will become less prevalent over the next few years, but I think the participation gap, the kids that you saw in that video, only about 35 or 40% of the kids who were in the contest last year were from lower income households and from Title I schools, and we're really working hard to push that number way past half. But the kids are not getting the scaffolds and the guidance and the support that they need from the adults in their lives. So that participation gap, I think, is just as significant, if not more so. We're seeing in the report that Mike was a co-author of, a real shift in what's happening, and Piaget may have predicted this, right, that you're beginning to see the shift in the activities that kids take part in around ages 7.5 or 8. A lot more file sharing, a lot more game playing, a lot more participatory media by the kids themselves, and they're migrating to doing more media multitasking. The older kids, I mean, this stuff is, some researchers actually think is unbelievable. It's based on self-reports, but according to the Kaiser Family Foundation in 2010, kids were squeezing 10.75 hours of media consumption or exposure into a little bit over 7.5 hours. How do they do that? And this is happening outside of school. So it's kind of like they're wired and sleeping with their machines. I have 3 teenagers, it's actually true. One of the interesting things here, which we don't know the causality or the direction of the relationship, but something that is reason to pause about, if you're seeing the 8 to 18s as sort of, if you're seeing the younger kids as aspirational for the 8 to the 18s, and you've seen these patterns of media consumption moving, it's this relationship, or this, I don't even know how to describe it because it's not a correlation, but the fact that heavy media users do less well in school, are often disengaged, and often have depression issues and get into trouble. So what comes first, right? You disengage and then you become a heavy media consumer, or vice versa, or some combination of that. We have observed among younger kids that heavy media users do tend to be from low-income households. So, okay, that's interesting and maybe a little bit worrisome, but there are lots of new ways that we think we can take the struggling learner who's also a heavy media consumer and get them engaged. Some of my friends at the Life Center, which is a research consortium that the National Science Foundation supports. Any of you guys know about the work of Stanford and University of Washington, Northwestern around the Life Center. So they've come up with that's not their figure, that's mine. They've come up with a visual, which I didn't have today, which is, it shows the amount of time that children spend in formal learning institutions along a continuum. And it shows that only 18.5% of children's time beginning at school age, age 5 and up, is spent in school actually. Obviously before kids turn 5, it's less, it's actually a little less than 10%. So at the Cooney Center, we think about the transmedia and trans-setting applications of media. And Susan Landry showed, I think, her own conception with her program, Circle, of the Bronfenbrenner ecological system, and I'm a mentee of Bronfenbrenner, so this is our visual of how we think these variety of ecologies are interacting with each other. So here we go. This is what's happening. Everybody is kind of staring down into their device, or they're staring out into space. So how can we go from this to this? I mean, younger kids really do enjoy using digital media. How many of you have been on YouTube and kind of taken a look at the number of broken books that toddlers are identifying? By broken books, I mean they're looking at a book and they're going like this. It's kind of incredible. But young children are particularly engaged. Here you're seeing a Skype interaction between relatives. So we've been trying to think about the dynamics around digital media use, and particularly for struggling learners and heavy media consumers. This is a report that we put out about 18 months ago by my colleague, Dr. Lori Takeuchi, which is called Families Matter. And we wanted to reassert that it's not all about cognition, it's not all about development, it's not all about approaches to learning. I mean, there's a series of dynamics that are going on within the modern household, the modern family dynamic that we wanted to call attention to. So we blended a national survey of some 1,100 parents of 3 to 10-year-olds with 4 rich case studies of children in California who were making the transition from one level of media consumption and family interaction to another. And here we found some kind of really interesting things. One is the switching dynamic between adult and child in terms of the power relationship or in the transactional relationship that's going on. A third of the parents of 3 to 11-year-olds admitted that they had learned something technical from their kids. Another really interesting thing about this, especially in light of professional statements, such as a very compelling one from NYC, is that parents are really trying to figure out a way to cope in a much more balanced way around media consumption. But one really interesting thing here is that they think that everybody else has a balancing problem, but not their own family. It's kind of the sort of thing that you hear in surveys of how do you feel about your own school versus every other school, or how do you feel, well, used to be, how did you feel about your own representative in Congress? Used to be positively disposed towards him or her. That's no longer the case. We've also been doing a lot of work on mobile media. This is a report from about 2 years ago. Learning is an app for that, where we began to kind of just delve into some mini studies of usability of apps by younger children, but also the kind of learning gains, the short-term learning gains that could result from research-based, curriculum-based apps that were developed, some by PBS, some by other educational media producers. We also did a parent survey in here to get a sense of how they were feeling about the mobile media revolution. A series of other reports. We've been looking at games too, and Game Changer was our first attempt to take a look at what often is ignored and neglected in early childhood, which is the interstices, the very rich and deep connections between healthy outcomes and learning outcomes. And so this report, which was supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, tried to take a look at the whole variety of different games that are being used to promote learning and healthy development, but also the threats to learning and healthy development that games pose, some of the risks as well as some of the rewards. We've been taking a close look at intergenerational play. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We think that Mrs. Cooney's original insight that you could build an educational media property that appealed to multiple generations was something that really could transform decades, could transition across decades. So we've been looking at the new play and learn patterns across generations with digital objects such as games. And this last one is about a couple months old. We've been tracking the development of educational apps that are popular and that are revenue makers. And iLearn is kind of a tracking study that, believe it or not, has shown that since 2009, when 49% of all the top sellers on the educational marketplace on iTunes were for preschoolers, it's now 72%. So what is the new co-viewing? Demography has changed. Mom and dad and other adults in children's lives are working harder, those who are working. They're out of the household, they're busier, and often they're not watching early childhood educational media programs together. They're doing something else together perhaps, but there's not as much co-viewing of the educational media as there once was. We've been trying to figure this out with this august group of research scholars and focusing in on 3 different big challenges. We're interested in how parents today can motivate to engage in new tactics of engagement. We're very, very interested in this bridging across platforms, but across settings. And, well, I just said that. Here's our newest report. It's our first online report that is solely online. Goes into a whole series of rich interactions that can happen around co-viewing. The radio, the technology of today, book reading, to joint media engagement that we think is ripe. So the guide goes through the 7 levels of intergenerational engagement that comes from co-viewing or joint media engagement, and comes up with a series of future directions for research. I wanted to tell you that we were inspired by the kind of workshops that we've held and the scans of the research literature to begin to develop more field research and also to begin to build some things ourselves. So, and the discussion about the transition from print to digital has really been compelling us. So you've seen all this discussion about what's the developmental sequelae that are attached to going from print to digital. So we've been really curious about this. We decided to build something ourselves. This is, I can say more in the discussion period. We partnered with the Nokia Research Lab in Palo Alto and decided to use the Muppets as scaffolders and guides for an intergenerational, across-distance book reading experience. So what happened here is and the apps associated with this just came out about a month ago, but we actually put together a book reading device that allowed via Skype a grandparent, a parent, and a child to read a book together with Elmo and friends actually helping them turn the pages and have discussions together. It's really, really fascinating. It's called Story Visit. So what's different between the print books and the digital books, ebooks? How do they encourage dialogic reading or not, comprehension, engagement, affect, and enjoyment? And in which context can that rich dialogic reading experiment take place? So we've been taking a look at what's called enhanced ebooks and basic ebooks with these research questions. We're interested in that ping pong match that Yuri Bronfenbrenner called out. It's so important for oral literacy and for brain development and just for intimacy, for there to be that parent-child or that adult-child interaction around something important, a book. Design features, which platform supports, these are the issues that we've been looking at. This is inspired by some of the work by Parrish Morris and Hirsch Pasek. So we have a series of different quick pilot studies, a series of different surfacey questions in order to provide empirical food for thought for others. We're trying to stimulate others to follow our lead, and we have partnerships with community-based organizations like the Science Museum in New York, Hall of Science, and Boys and Girls Clubs of America. This is a little bit of a recap of where we are. We have been doing these quick studies for sort of 24 to 36 parents. Those are the procedures. And we've been coding for the parent-child interactions actually with the use of a flip cam. One of the really important things that we think technology can provide for researchers and for practitioners is these very inexpensive ways to do it yourself. Go back for a second. So these are the books that we've been looking at, and this was the first quick study. We've been focusing on STEM and the connections between foundational literacy skills and more complex vocabulary development. So these were the early findings from some of the ebook reader research experiments. No difference in comprehension when comparing a basic ebook to the print version, but the kids recalled fewer details from an enhanced ebook. With the enhanced ebook, both parents and children elaborated less about the content of the book. Again, that research from Parrish Morris et al. Parents spent time disciplining and prompting the child to interact with the features. We think that certain parenting styles, authoritative versus authoritarian parenting styles, are coming into the mix here. And children, of course, love those hotspots. So how can we figure out a way to build the hotspots so they're an exciting and less distracting part of the action in the book? I'm just going to click through some of these. This is what we've been doing. So we had 3 studies. I just want to tell you about study 3, which is the analysis is underway. We decided that we didn't want to do a randomized survey. We just didn't have the budget to do it. So we created a snowball survey by writing to our friends who are mommy bloggers, Head Start, Child Care, Universal Pre-K, family support, parenting education programs. And within 10 days, we got 1,300 responses to a 17-minute online survey. Stay tuned, we'll have really interesting analyses from that. These are the research questions from the book selection. How are kids and parents reading together? Are there differences in how they choose the print books versus how they choose ebooks? How do parents and child attitudes and behaviors change? Parent survey. So I wanted to just share with you before I close a number of different priorities that I think that the early childhood community, the policy community, and the folks who are concerned with practice should be focused on. First of all, I want to recommend to all of you who have not yet digested the NAYC New Early Childhood Technology Statement, do it. It's very thoughtfully written. It's taken a long time to develop. I'm not pleased with every single part of it, but it is an amazing leap forward. Chip Donahue is here, Warren Buckliner is here, others who are fundamentally involved in it. And wake up early tomorrow after college basketball tonight and go to Chip's session. We think it's really important to begin norming children's early childhood digital experiences. It would be a scandal if the kids started their digital technology experiences consuming stuff that's crap. That's part of the digital wasteland. There's 5 elements that we're working a lot on, which I'll talk a bit about. At Sesame Street, there's a big push on to cross from just being an educational media product that is available in the home around the world or in community settings around the world to getting into the schoolhouse and really thinking about how the power of our work can make a difference. At the CUNY Center, we're focusing on these other elements. We've been doing some work with groups like the Erickson Institute and others on a new vision for teacher quality. This is as the K-12 world has discovered somehow, what grandma's good common sense would tell you, the quality of the teacher matters a whole lot. So we've been trying to think about not just Common Core deeper learning, but how do you combine deeper with joyful? I mean, let's stop stripping the joy out of all the assessment culture, and let's start thinking about, and I've seen a lot of very good examples of this around here. Let's bring some of the joyfulness, whether it's play-oriented or just the rich kind of intergenerational communication that I was referring to earlier. We need a new community to surround the teachers. It's not just the teachers who are in the early childhood settings or in the elementary schools. It's their peers around the world. It's their peers around the block. In this new report called Take a Giant Step, we get into a whole range of the different challenges in teacher ed that so many of you know about. This was a task force that I co-chaired with Linda Darling-Hammond from Stanford, and I recommend it to you. It's a little bit of a blueprint for what teacher education institutions and ongoing professional development should look like for teachers of kids 3 to 8. These are the big levers for change that we are actually at a critical moment to think about. Obviously, Common Core I mentioned, the assessment craze, the fact that there are so many leading citizens who are interested in early childhood now. We need to leverage their interest. The fact that the Obama administration, for example, just put $500 million into infrastructure building to race to the top early childhood. And something that I see as a public media executive as being often very much overlooked, which is this wealth of public media assets that have been produced with taxpayer support, but which are not being deployed in educational settings nearly enough. One of our sort of self-criticisms is that a lot of the work that we do ends up in the ether. It's really good, it's meticulously developed, but it's 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there, half an hour there, and it's not linked to an instructional, it's not linked to an ongoing, it's not linked to a trend-setting strategy. So things that are free or low cost that the taxpayers already paid for, we got to open them up. These are the recommendations. They're mostly policy recommendations. One thing that I'm just going to close with is that I've been advocating, along with James Paul Gee, the professor of literacy and games at Arizona State University, for the development of a digital teacher corps. The current FCC chairman, Julius Genikowski, has picked this up and is talking about a digital core of community folks who will focus on digital literacy. I think it's most important that the pioneers in this room continue to be bold. What's really going to be necessary is that the kids that you just saw, they're the ones who are going to be the innovators and the bold experimenters of the future. And we're in our 43rd year of experimentation at Sesame. We cannot rest on our laurels. We've got to be very bold. So how I'm going to close with is these 5, I think, bold steps that are necessary. 1, we've made a leap forward with the NYC tech policy, put aside the qualms, and put the guidance into practice. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on that. I think it's very important for us all to be involved with public engagement strategies to champion kids' interests. This public media partnership that I described, the fact that we need much more tactical and usable R&D. When I started the job at the CUNY Center, somebody asked me about the research enterprise related to educational technology. And I said, when it came to kids' consumption, we were in the Jetsonian era, right? And when it comes to the research enterprise, unfortunately, we're more like in the era of the Flintstones. So we really got to ramp up the usable R&D. And then these design competitions, such as the one that I described before. Some of these providers are awesome providers. They were in the first year. You saw the youth winners from the second year. The competition is open right now for another week. If you know teachers or graduate students or kids who want to enter, there's another week to get in. These are the categories. And I just wanted to say thank you for listening to me for such a long time. I hope it was interesting. And we provide all sorts of news you can use on our website, on Facebook, on Twitter, and LinkedIn. Please check us out. Thanks for listening. And I have time for questions.
Thank you, Michael. That was fantastic. There's so much that the CUNY Center produces that I would encourage so many of you to read. I'm wondering how you would grapple with the engagement issue in terms of engaging with families and meeting families kind of where they are. So how should we, I guess, as sort of the educators out there and people who are working with families of young children, how do we connect with them in a meaningful way? I'm thinking about right now the study that was done using cell phones with families, I think it was in Mississippi, who were low-income families, but you were trying to kind of send text messages to them on their phones that would help them spark conversations with their own children. And I don't know if in the co-viewing study you get into that at all, but it's trying to kind of find ways to connect where especially low-income families or struggling families are right now.
Yeah, no, it's such a good question from Lisa Guernsey, if you all don't know, from the New America Foundation Early Education Project. First bit of guidance is keep it simple. That the kinds of educational media that is being developed, believe it or not, a lot of it still needs to be done on DVD. That the ubiquity of the media, particularly if you're trying to go from school out, from Head Start or from universal pre-K or primary school out to the families, that engaging them via simple educational media messages is, number one. Be a little bit duplicative of what you develop also. It's okay to be a little bit of redundancy is not a bad idea. And then I think that there needs to be a very, very big emphasis on getting back to the early childhood field's roots, which is engaging families in very, very different ways. Families today are harried, they're working 2 jobs, they're involved in all sorts of stressors based on the economy, and so are a lot of the providers who are in these settings. And we've got to figure out a way for the providers and the parents to get more than 5 minutes in a cloud of dust together. So we're trying to work on a range of different ways in which simple messages, either through text for babies or different ways of reaching parents during the day, will work. We pioneered something called the Elmo study a few years ago. We're actually going to go in the field and do another Elmo study in which we worked with 100 different families in California where we took a parent and a child, and we texted them different messages that were complementary during the course of the day. Elmo would say something to a 4-year-old. Rosita would say something to the adult. And we found a very interesting convergence of interest coming from that shared media family experience. It was under controlled conditions, and therefore I don't know exactly how it would work in the real world, but I think that there are ways that you can engage family communication with media when you use powerful teaching tools. Muppets happen to be one of those powerful teaching tools. A lot of the folks who are in the audience here have remarkable teaching tools as well. But we've got to figure out ways to bridge home to school, and we also have to figure out when parents are in the school, we've got to get a little bit more time with them. I think the engagement of media is powerful across generations. If we come up with creative ways to keep parents in little educational technology teach-ins in school, it might work. Other questions? No? My favorite Muppet? Grover. Grover and Cookie. I don't like Elmo. Don't tell anybody. He's very, very popular.
The effective hotspots. Could you talk about what those look like? And
other people here know more than I do about what the effective, the people who are sort of pioneering things. We're looking at not only the hotspots in terms of the user interface for the child and sort of where it is on the page, and we're also taking a look at things like baking guidance into. Shali Fish came up with the idea of a mommy bar at one point, when Nickelodeon was young, and we're trying to think about different ways to guide the use of the hotspot, because what we're observing is that, particularly in certain households, that the kids are very excited about the hotspots, and they're grasping at and pointing at, and it's disrupting the dialogic reading process. So is it the placement on the page? Does it have to do with the UI? Is it the type of hotspot that's over the top in terms of the bells and whistles that are associated with it? How do the hotspots sort of combine with the print material? So there's a bunch of that stuff sort of going on inside these studies now that we'll have some insights on in about a month or so. But other people here, I'm sure, have good guidance on this.
You mentioned there's a desire for sort of a balanced consumption of media. Is there sort of a food pyramid of media, so to speak, that
that's such a great question. So that is a good idea for certain organizations to think about. The Fred Rogers Center, along with a bunch of other organizations, are actually trying to think about what constitutes quality children's media and encouraging a kind of a food pyramid. It's kind of an interesting idea, Mike, for it. But I mean, in terms of the guidance that organizations like my mother organization, my father organization, Sesame Workshop gives us, an analogy can be made to Cookie Monster, right? So Cookie Monster, how many of you know that Saturday Night Live called him the Pilates Monster because he's on a diet? Nobody knows that. Anyway, Cookie Monster knows that a cookie is not an anytime food, right? It's a sometimes food. So he's being encouraged to eat his colors. He's being encouraged to eat the food pyramid. So an analog to that is, look, reading at any time is definitely part of the food pyramid, right? Having conversations facilitated by just one-on-one or family time or group time within an educational setting, anytime food, important part of the food pyramid. There's a bunch of different educational media experiences which are the carbs and the sugars, but there's a lot of those that are a good part of the food pyramid. So the answer, that's a long answer to say no, we don't have it, but there's a lot of people thinking about what that food pyramid should look like. And I mean, look, if kids who are 8 are consuming 7.5 hours of media a day, and kids who are 4 are consuming 4 hours a day, and you've got 46% of kids entering school not ready, or 33% entering school not ready, there's a no-brainer here. There's something going on that amount of time otherwise spent just in terms of the key opportunity costs has to be more balanced. And I think what NYC has done very, very smartly with their technology statement is to say that there just is a lack of balance often. That doesn't mean that we should put our head in the sand and say, do away with it all. We need to move towards stuff that we know works. So that's what I see the next 5 years being all about. Go ahead, over there and then over there.
How would you classify reading
digitally, such as reading on an iPad.
Yeah.
It seems like there's an overlap. I mean, you're involved with digital things in computers and media, and now we have e-books.
Yeah.
Where does that fit into reading anytime?
Sure. I mean, that's what we're looking at right now as part of, that's one of the key features of the, co-viewing research that's underway. So there's some scholars who think that there's sort of a developmental sequence that, there's been recent media attention to the fact that a lot of parents are holding on to print and really making that a different kind of interactive ping pong match, kind of thing, and that the use of the device to read is more kind of browsing, that there's a lot of, just as you suggest, getting to know the digital device, not really learning as much about the key elements, the emerging literacy skills. So I don't know yet, but I think that you're going to see, obviously the explosion of e-reader, book apps are definitely, being developed. Our research seems to indicate that there are different settings in which that, e-reader, that mobile device is going to be passed back. It's going to be passed back in the car. It's going to be passed, back in the grocery store. There's going to be these sorts of, babysitting with the digital devices that are going on. And what we're trying to push, particularly for the kids who are not getting the support in other places, is that those moments are real learning moments, and that if the parents are not going to be reading, before bedtime, 20 or 30 minutes, as all parents of preschoolers probably should be doing, that, with a print book, that there be some combination of print and digital experiences within the course of the day that the kid can initiate themselves. We had another question back here. There's going to be a lot of research on this, by the way. It's just beginning to bubble.
Hi, you made the distinction between the consumption of media and the construction of media.
Consumption and instruction?
Construction.
Oh,
so people
construction and consumption?
Right, so construction might be the kids that were making video games earlier on in your presentation. Has your research shed light on some of the correlations between those different media interactions and some of your higher level questions like engagement with school or preparation for 21st century skills? Do you see a distinction between those relationships with media and those outcomes?
Yeah, I'm not sure I caught all of it, but first of all, in terms of the issues that relate to ubiquitous consumption and purposeful, constructive use of media, I do recommend, if you haven't read it yet, the NYC statement is very nuanced and very helpful, I think. So go to Chip's session tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. In terms of the predictive value of how much consumption balanced with how much intentional learning versus reading on your own, or all the other opportunity costs that are associated with the different activities that you could do, kind of playing outside or going to a museum or library, or these things are all churning right now. I don't feel comfortable telling you that there's some sort of a formula for what's constructive and what's not. I think one of the really interesting things that's going to come from this phase of digital media construction and consumption is some new ground rules, but also figuring out a way as a parent, a caregiver, a teacher, how you can extend the learning that takes place on the digital platform, that it is not separate. It is, again, cross-setting. It is within the context of how the children are learning what's fundamental to learn. So technology is a tool. A lot of people like to say it's neutral. It's not. It's disruptive. It's definitely disruptive in many ways, particularly among young children. But it is a tool that can be shaped and melded in a way that will allow great instruction to go on. There's no doubt in my mind that great instruction can take place without technology. It's happened. But there's also little doubt in my mind that we can do better with the technologies of today to connect kids, to enhance relationships with caring adults, and to create a different worldview, which is very appropriate to a collaborative, highly networked, highly global, and totally digital world. So those of us who are ignoring it, and that's not this crowd here today, or complaining about it, wake up.
Michael,
Hi, Dale McManus from Hatch Early Learning. I've read a lot of the reports, maybe even all of them. I'm a great admirer.
Thank you.
Really. And I want to second what Lisa says. I think they're must reading for all of us. My question is about your thoughts on, and I don't really know the terminology that you might use, but cross-platform or multi-platform learning, and how you see that as is that a potential way that we're going to be going in the future?
No doubt. I see it among young people in my own life. I see it as one of the big opportunities on net, and I refer to it as it's transmedia, transgenerational, transsetting. So how do you take an experience? A lot of the executives at Sesame Workshop want to show you how dealing with Elmo in the morning will lead you to dealing with Elmo in the afternoon and in the evening. That's fine. That's good. As long as it's a rich educational media experience. But what I'm more interested in is how can you take one passion, let's say Elmo is a passion, not mine, but it's around a subject area. It's around STEM or inquiry skills or just fundamental reading and writing skills. And that media is then connected to, what they learned is part of your personal dashboard, your personal learning plan. It's then somehow connected to what you learn in school that day, maybe not with Elmo, but with somebody else. These are the sorts of things that actually are going to begin to happen. Sometimes platforms are going to have a whole range of different menu items to blend and sort. And we see some of this in the work that Eileen has done, for example, with hundreds of ebooks and the variety of different ways in which you could self-pace and self-direct things. So I think that the fact that you can look at digital media like games and you can look at mobile media across these different platforms is just fundamentally exciting. I hope that's somewhat responsive.